Welcome to this month's episode of Chat with the Chairman. I am CFMA's 2021-22 Chairman Pam Hepburn. Today I'm sitting down with CFMA's founder and first president, David Casey. We're excited to have David on today, especially since this year is CFMA's 40th anniversary. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today, David.
Well, thank you for having me, Pam. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't get the opportunity to do this too often, so it'll be a pleasure.
When is the last time that you made an appearance at a CFMA event?
Well, I do try to make it to the local CFMA chapter meetings, but with COVID, we haven't had any of those in quite some time. And the last time I actually made a presentation before a group was at the Mid-Atlantic Conference, which was several years ago. I was talking about the history of CFMA. That's all I get to talk about these days.
Well, it sounds like this chat is long overdue then. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get started in the industry?
In the construction industry?
Yeah.
Well, I started my career in public accounting. I was with a firm called Touche Ross. Touche Ross was then one of the big 8 public accounting firms that is now Deloitte. Through mergers, it's the successor firm is called Deloitte. I had been there for quite a few, 7 or so years. I was a senior manager with the firm, and almost all of the work that I had done up until that point was within the insurance industry. But I did have one construction client, and that one construction client was a company by the name of Titan Group Inc. They were a public company. Fairly large. They were a GC. They operated throughout the United States through several different subsidiaries. And the one interesting thing is they were having some very severe financial issues. So severe, in fact, that the surety had stepped in and was financing their operations on a day-to-day basis at that time. In the midst of these problems, their chief financial officer decided that it was time for him to leave, and he left. And their CEO, chairman of the board and CEO, approached me and asked me if I would be interested in stepping in and taking over as their CFO, which was a shock to me, really, because first of all, I had very little experience in the construction industry, and I was a young guy. I was like 29 years old at the time. But the opportunity, but I loved the construction business, even though I only had that one client. And the opportunity to get into the construction business and to step into this particular situation, which was really unusual, was too much. I couldn't refuse it. So I accepted the job, and now I was full-time construction.
Well, that is quite an opportunity at 29. Yeah. So then how did you get started with CFMA?
Well, fast forward a couple of years in Titan. In my office one day, and one of my colleagues, a fellow by the name of Ben Klausner, walks into my office with a piece of paper and explains that he got an invitation to attend a meeting that was being sponsored by an organization called the New Jersey Construction Accounting Association. He said, you know what this is? I said, no, I've never heard of it. He said, neither did I. He said, what do you think? You want to go? I said, yeah, well, let's go. Check it out, see what it's about. And I was kind of fascinated with this because I had actually been looking for opportunities to find, I needed CPE to support my CPA, and I couldn't find CPE that was specific to the construction industry. I said, geez, maybe this is an opportunity to do just that. So anyway, we went and we attended that meeting. Excuse me, getting dried out here. We attended the meeting, and at that meeting, the organizer stood up and explained that this organization, the New Jersey Construction Accounting Association, had ceased to function several years earlier for lack of interest or lack of leadership or for whatever reason, I forget. And that he had some money left over in the treasury, and that he sponsored this meeting with those monies, and what was effectively a last-ditch effort to see if he could revive interest in doing this kind of thing. So at the end of the night, at the end of his presentation, he asked if anyone would be interested in participating in doing that in that endeavor. And myself and 8 other individuals raised our hands and said, yeah, we'd like to do that. And hence we became what became known as the formation committee of this new association.
That's wonderful. So at that time, then it was just in New Jersey?
At that time, it was just in New Jersey. We were starting to get some out-of-state participation in the group, but it was mostly from the adjoining states of New York and Pennsylvania, but there were some from other areas. And we were heading towards, we're still functioning as a committee. We're sponsoring dinner meetings and seminars, and everything's going along pretty good. Interest is building. And we're heading towards actually, making the association a formal association. And I contacted the then financial editor for Engineering News Record and explained to him what we were doing. And he published an article. I have a copy of it here. It was published in January of 1982. And the title of it was, I don't know, can you see this?
Hold it up just a little bit. Yeah, maybe up higher.
Higher?
Yeah.
Okay. Top financial officers launch new association.
That's awesome.
Which was
top financial officers.
Yeah. And this Engineering News Record is all over the place. So, after this article was published, well, before I say that, the first sentence of this thing, I never forget this sentence. It says, aiming at forming a national association by spring of 1982. And then I went on to explain what we were doing. And this created two things. One thing it created was a rush of requests for information. How do I join? Tell me more about it, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing it created was an instinct in us to aim at forming a national association sometime pretty soon, because everybody was kind of demanding we do that.
They kind of set a goal for you, didn't they?
It kind of set a goal for us. And that following spring, I think it was in April, we had our first annual meeting. At that annual meeting, we stopped functioning as a committee and elected officers and directors. I was elected as the first president of the association. And we accepted our first 111 membership applications for the organization. And there was this newsletter that was, can you see that?
Yeah, move it over like right in front of your face for a minute, and then we'll get it sent. That's better. Perfect. Okay. Yep. And then put it down so we can see you.
Okay. This newsletter was, talked about talked about our first annual meeting. The speaker was one of the members of the committee that authored the SOP 81-1.
Oh, okay.
Which was brand new at the time. It had been out for about a year at that time. So that was kind of interesting. And the other interesting thing about this newsletter is the back 2 pages contained our entire membership listing of the incoming 111 members. So it's a piece of memorabilia.
All on 2 pages.
All on 2 pages, yeah. Page and a half of general members and half a page of associate members.
So where was the first chapter and when did that happen?
Well, what happened was, we started thinking about how we can serve people in other parts of the country effectively from New Jersey. And we said, well, the way to do that is chapters. So we set out to restructure the organization in a way where chapters would be the answer to spreading across the country. And the first chapter, a year later at the second annual meeting, we spun off the first chapter, which was Philadelphia. We accepted the first chapter, which was Philadelphia. And at that same time, we spun off New Jersey as a separate chapter, and then elected separate officers for New Jersey and for the National Association for the first time. But now we had 2 chapters and we were off and running.
That's awesome. So what were those early days like, David?
Well, they were interesting to say the least. Thinking back to those times, getting things done was much different than it is today. I mean, there was no internet, there was no email, there were no cell phones. So everything we did, we had to do by snail mail or telephone. I think we're just barely past dial-up telephones. We had push-button telephones, but that was about as good as the highest technology got at the time. And the other thing is we had no staff. So everything that was done had to be done by the officers and directors of the association. When you think of the treasurer, for example, that treasurer didn't just approve the budgets, he made them, he balanced the checkbook, he wrote the checks, he did everything associated with the accounting for the organization.
And still had a full-time paying job, right?
And we also had full-time paying jobs. That's correct. That's correct.
How many chapters were you involved in starting?
Well, I was directly involved in. When I say directly involved, I organized a meeting in a particular area and attended that meeting and helped set up an organizational committee. And I was involved to that extent in 7 or 8 chapters, I think. And involved to a lesser extent in quite a few more.
And how are you able to do all of that?
Well, that's a good question. Well, the answer to that is a lot of that occurred in my 3rd and final year as president of the association. And early on in that year, my company Titan had been wound down to almost nothing. And we're getting ready to sell what was left of it. And it was time for me to do something else. And Touche Ross, my prior employer, offered me the opportunity to rejoin their firm as a partner responsible for the construction practice in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And you know, I accepted that. Position. One of the byproducts of that is that Touche Ross supported my efforts in the CFMA. They allowed me to spend a significant amount of time on CFMA business. They allowed me to travel, as in traveling to these chapter formation situations that I did. And they provided me with a full-time administrative assistant who wound up spending the majority of her time dealing with CFMA business. So that was quite an advantage to them. And it was also, you know, as an aside to that, I don't think I would have had that opportunity at Touche Ross had it not been for the prior 5 years that I had spent getting CFMA off the ground. I mean, I think that's my involvement in CFMA is what attracted them to make me that offer. So that was a big thing for me as well.
That is really big, and it's nice to have that company support even now to this day for volunteers. How long did it take before you opened a CFMA office and were able to hire staff?
Well, at the end of that year, which was the end of my 3rd term, we were looking forward to the next president taking over, who happened to be Bill Miller. He was the 2nd president, and he was a CFO of a construction company. And it was pretty clear that he was not going to have the resources available to him that I had available to me at Touche Ross. So we figured it's time. We need to hire a staff person, and I began searching for a staff person. And my administrative assistant, Mary Ann Graham, raised her hand and said, "I'd like to take the job," and she did. For several months, she continued to work in the same place she was in our office, Touche Ross's office, until I would say it was probably another 4, 5, 6 months later. We opened the first standalone CFMA office. It was in Edison, New Jersey.
Wow, that's quite a story of grassroots organization and volunteering. In the last 40 years, has there been anything that surprised you about CFMA?
Well, I would say that throughout the 40 years, what has continued to surprise me is the enthusiasm of the membership. And even more than that, the dedication and passion of the leadership. To me, it's been almost amazing to see how the leadership has gotten so wrapped up personally in making this thing a success. And it is that passion of the leadership that enabled CFMA to grow from where I left it to where it is today.
Well, I know the friendships and education and leadership opportunities that I've experienced throughout CFMA have been critical to my success. And I know that's where my passion for CFMA comes from. What keeps you involved with CFMA all these years?
Oh, interesting. Well, to me, I don't know, CFMA was an extremely important part of my life. it definitely made a huge difference in my career. I continued to, once I stopped as president, I stepped aside and let others take over. But I've always continued to be involved and interested in the activities, and willing to do whatever is asked of me along the way. And I've had many people who have said exactly what you just said, who actually have come up, sought me out at a national meeting and come up to me and said, "Thank you. This has really made a difference in my career, and thank you very much." And that in itself is quite a reward.
That's really special.
It is very special.
Now that you're retired, what are your hobbies?
Well, what are my hobbies? I still do some consulting, industry, obviously, construction industry. But most of my time is spent with family, and I'm a golfer and a skier, and that takes up a bit of time as well.
That sounds wonderful. We like to end each show asking our viewers a question, so let's hear from all of you. Comment below with your favorite CFMA memory. David, I'd like to thank you for all you've done for CFMA and for joining me today. This has been a really special conversation. To everyone watching, be sure and tune in next month when I sit down with Herb Brownett.